If you love rerolling in TFT, well, Set 12 Magic Mayhem released not 1, not 2, but 8 hero augments. I did a ton of research to learn what makes them all strong, and I personally have gotten second or better on all of them. Let's go ahead and dive into the TFT Academy tier list and find out what exactly makes these hero augments strong. Before I start, as a PSA to anybody who hasn't heard, Set 12 has actually changed the bag sizes for 1, 2, and 3 cost units. Bag sizes means every unique copy of that unit in the pool. For example, for 1 cost, if you're playing like a Blitzcrank hero augment, which we'll talk about first, there are now 30 copies of Blitzcrank in the pool as opposed to 22 in the past. This theoretically means that 3 people could hit Blitzcrank 3 at 9 copies for a 3-star. 25 for 2 costs, 18 for 3 costs, which does mean that 2 people could theoretically hit 3 cost 3 stars. And they haven't changed anything for 4 and 5 costs. So while there are more copies of the unit in the pool, that theoretically makes it easier to hit, it also means that you're not going to get griefed nearly as hard because people just need those units for their synergies. So for example, we talked about Blitzcrank. If people are just holding Blitzcrank to just play a generic frontline, you're not going to be suffering nearly as much because there's still going to be a ton more in the pool. But what this means as a trade-off is if no one else is re-rolling in the lobby, there's going to be way more 1, 2, and 3 cost units that you're going to roll and potentially see that can flood the pool and therefore be harder to hit. And so it's not just a strict upside, there are trade-offs. So this actually ends up being really important because there's a lot of hero augments, and if you end up just getting adjacently contested, that would really suck. So Riot preemptively try to get ahead of that problem in case you end up getting a situation where you just can't hit because too many people are playing your 1, 2s, and 3 costs. The most consistent hero augment during PB was Zap Attack Blitzcrank. Zap Attack says, gain a 2-star Blitzcrank, and your strongest Blitzcrank becomes supercharged, dealing magic damage to 2 nearby enemies every 4 seconds and on ability cast. Blitzcrank ends up ramping up a big-time shield and becomes super hard to kill, and because he's a Vanguard, he has a lot of durability, which is the equivalent of damage reduction. It's the same thing you get on Redemption or Steadfast Heart. It's just a keyword that's been added to imply damage reduction. So the way you want to build Blitzcrank is very, very tanky. Ionic Spark, Redemption, and Stoneplate are generally considered to be best in slot, but you don't actually need Spark necessarily because you might get things like Shiv. You can go for a 3rd defensive item on Blitzcrank, like a Bramble, Dragon's Claw, Steadfast Heart, or something else. Blitzcrank is a 1-cost reroll, meaning that you don't want to level early. You want to try and focus on your economy and lose streak because you want to get as much gold as possible and collect the right Blitzcrank items. And at 3-1, if you're close to Blitzcrank 3, you will roll for it to get 3-star Blitzcrank. Or if you're kind of far, like maybe you have like 4 or 5 copies, you instead roll above 50 gold to slowly get Blitzcrank 3. The thing about this comp is that people feel often tempted to roll for Ziggs 3, but he's not actually that important because Ziggs 3 falls off really hard towards the late stages of the game. And instead, you actually want to roll for Veigar 3. So once you get to Blitzcrank 3, you level up to 7, roll for Veigar 3, and try to prioritize Veigar items. And the nice thing is Ziggs actually ends up holding almost the exact same items as Veigar, so you can just sell Ziggs, hold another copy of Ziggs, and then transfer to Veigar. Veigar is also a unit that scales off of the number of charms you buy, which ends up being really good, because then you buy 1 charm every single round in Stage 3 while you're rerolling for Blitz 3, and that ends up scaling your Veigar very aggressively. Blitzcrank should be a solo frontline tank. I know we listed out like Yuumi and Blitzcrank, but Yuumi is just an attachment from Nora because Nora and Yuumi gives you the option of having Yuumi attached to Blitzcrank and heal him. And this other copy of Blitzcrank is the good artifacts that also work for him, which is Unending Despair, which apparently is insanely good on him. Forbidden Idol, which he converts all of his shields into max HP, which is huge. And then Hull Crusher, which just gives him a ton of tankiness and helps you get the 3 items very quickly. I would say all 3 of these artifacts would replace Spark or Redemption because you could actually get these through other means. Spark could be Shiv in the back line, and you can always put Redemption on another unit. Other good augments to think about for Blitzcrank is Be As Friends. This ends up making you want to play Vertical Honey. High Voltage, which on 3-2 is just another Blitzcrank item. You might just get 3 item Blitzcrank that way. I actually really like Shields Up, which means that Blitzcrank can't get CC'd. Blitzcrank actually does a lot of damage, so having him not be able to get CC'd during his ult is really huge. Anything that gives HP is really big as well. Giant and Mighty combat advantages. And then things like Pandora's can be very good because you probably need a lot of specific items, or more particularly, you just don't want things like, you know, a lot of gloves and bows. 7 Honeymancy is very much worth it, but the problem is you need 2 emblems, so it can be kind of tricky to fit in. If you do get Honeymancy +1, try to put it on like a backliner unit because Honeymancy is more of a damage trait and it scales off of how much damage you're dealing. It does scale with a little bit of frontline, but I'd rather put on a backliner like Nora, for example, here. Good news for Dragon fans from Set 7 Dragonlands. Deja is back, mainly as a hero augment for Galio. Galio gets +3 range and also scales the AP based off the number of attacks that Galio does. And so that's why you want to stack Rage Blades on Galio. The best build for Galio is Rage Blade, plus a third item pending on your setup. This is the ideal final version that you can play Galio, where you go for Vex 3, Galio 3, and like really powerful units like Xerath and Nora. But in reality, what you're going to be playing a lot of times is a Vanguard setup. Vanguard works because you end up playing cheap units like Warwick and Blitzcrank, Rumble, and just getting a lot of cheap stats. Get 6 Vanguard very early alongside mages, and you're able to scale Galio that way. If you do end up staying on 6 Vanguard, you don't actually need to prioritize things like Gunblade to sustain your frontline nearly as much. You can instead play Jewel Gauntlet or Giant Slayer because you have so much tankiness with the Vanguard, you just need to have extra damage on Galio. There's also like portal variations that you could play for Galio, and there's some people that believe that mages might actually work as well, but I personally don't like it nearly as much. We might end up showing the Vanguard version as the primary way you're supposed to play it, though. We'll see how things refine over the course of the set. So this might actually look different compared to what it actually shows on the website. Galio is a 2-cost reroll, so you're going to be mainly rolling on 6. So make sure you play like a good early game portal-based strategy and try to get to level 6 with as much HP and gold. Roll until you have Galio 2 and ideally 2-star Vanguards, and then stay above 50 gold at 6 and roll for Galio 3. I personally think rolling for multiple things like Rumble 3 might be a waste, but some people might end up prioritizing any kind of 3-star Vanguard they can get, like Mordekaiser or Rumble as well. Some other good things for Galio: Prismatic Ticket to help you hit really fast. Pandora's items in general is going to be really good because bow and rods are just going to be very hard to find. Inspiring Epitaph because it just helps scale your attack speed. And anything that helps you with like delayed payoff. So Blossoming Lotus gets stronger as the fight goes on. Ascension gets stronger as the fight goes on. Very, very strong in this comp. You Have My Bow just gives you a bow. It's really good. Tiny but Deadly gives you a bunch of attack speed. Some artifacts for you to consider when you're playing a third item on Galio because you still want the double Rage Blade. You can try Wit's End. This has performed really well in some in-houses. Rapid Fire Cannon just for that raw attack speed and maybe replace one Rage Blade. And then Fish Bones, which is surprisingly really good. You might think it's kind of troll, but just try it and see what happens when you have a front line with Vanguards like that they can't get past, and Galio just snipes backline randomly. It's kind of crazy. So yeah, basically either the Arcana Flex version, the Vanguard version, or the Portal version for Galio. Very fun. There's all different kinds of ways that you can slice it. Sweet Tooth Nunu is a scaling hero augment where when Nunu gets the kill, he gets more HP, and that HP translates also to damage. So basically, the more Nunu kills targets, the stronger he gets, and it continues to snowball, so on and so forth. Best in slot Nunu is Archangels, Bloodthirster, +1. Some people like to play Warmogs because it just is straight up damage for him. But you could also justify playing like Redemption or other really strong items for Nunu that ends up being really good for solo frontline tanking. There's a little bit of discussion of whether or not you want to play more Honeymancy or Bastions for Nunu, and this is going to be the recommended version that we suggest based off PvE data, but this might change for live. 5 Honeymancy has been some of the stronger variations of it, but I have seen some Bastion variations of Nunu. It's just the problem that you play a lot of low quality Bastions. Like you play 6 Bastion, you're playing like Poppy and Lilia, and they don't really do much. So at least when you play with the Honeymancy, you're scaling it with Vagar, and you just get a lot of damage that way. Vagar loves blue buff, Gunblade, and then the third item here is Archangel Staff, but honestly, it could just be anything. Jewel Gauntlets, Giant Slayer, Guard Breaker, so on and so forth. If you do end up playing the Bastion variation, as we listed out here, you can go for Callista, like we show in earlier in the tier list with Callista plus Bastion, or you go for Rise because you do end up having the Taric, and you can link the portal and Scholar in the back. One of the most powerful augments for Nunu is Be As Friends, and this is probably the biggest reason why you want to play into Honeymancy, because if you can get Be As Friends, it is insane to get that max HP shield. Obviously, if you get Ticket and rerolling is really huge. Nunu has a lot of HP, so Martyr scales and becomes better the more max HP you get, so it's really powerful in Nunu. Magic Wand because you just need like a lot of rods for this comp in general. Ascension because the fight ends up stalling a long time. You play a ton of 2 costs and you can stack more with 2 healthy, or even Exiles because it scales off your max HP, and Nunu's gonna have a lot. Some good artifacts for Nunu. Innervating Locket is disgusting on Nunu. It's his best artifact. Definitely give it a try if you have an opportunity to get for it. I would probably replace Warmogs with it because it's the same thing of giving you a bunch of HP. Talisman Ascension is also really good. It's like 1A to this Innervating Locket. Probably replacing Warmogs as well. Seeker's Arm Guard is surprisingly really effective and probably what you would replace Archangels with, but I'm not entirely sure about that. I haven't actually seen it myself. I only see that it does really well in the data, so this is kind of an experimental choice here. Early game, just think about playing around Nunu plus early Honeymancy or Bastions to get things rolling. So as long as you're getting Nunu the kills, that's all that matters. Late game, you might not want to actually solo frontline Nunu, by the way. Like, this is just a recommended version of it, but if you're kind of behind, if you solo frontline Nunu, he might be dying too fast. So pay attention to that and move up some of the other units to try to make sure that Nunu can stay alive a little bit longer. Late game, if you're looking for extra cap, Diana is very, very good as a Bastion to go on top of this. So you can definitely play Diana too to help you go over the top and win the game. Spider Queen Elise is very similar to Garen reroll if you've played set 11 Inkborn Fables. Garen reroll being a one-cost nuker that really likes to single-handedly just take down things one by one and become really hard to kill. The cool thing about Elise is that she actually AoE. So unlike Garen in the past, where he would just kill one target at a time, Elise actually can hit backline units, and you don't really get stuck in those situations where there's like one or two carries alive in the back and one tank that you can't get past, and then you end up just getting triple teamed. Elise will eventually kill them. She does lose her stun though, so keep that in mind. If you're trying to position to stun a certain unit, that's not going to happen. Elise is a one-cost reroll, so once again, you're going to try not to level at all early game. Focus on your economy and collect as many Elises as possible. But she is strong enough that you might actually win some fights. It's entirely possible to 5-streak with Elise, especially if you have items ready for her early. Best items is Archangels, Bloodthirster, and the last item we're going to go with is Dragon's Claw. Very similar to Garen from last set, but you could actually go for a couple of other different slots in here, depending on what you end up getting. And Dragon's Claw works really well because of the healing 5 max HP, which is good with shapeshifters because you want to build vertical shapeshifters with Elise. Once you get to stage 3, either roll a lot of gold at 3-1 at level 4 so that you can get at least 3 if you're close. If you're pretty far away, you're only like 3 or 4 at least. Slow roll above 50 gold instead, and wait till you can hit at least 3 before pushing levels for more shapeshifters. Backline is going to be very similar to Shapeshifter Flex, which is the composition it's right next to. You play Smolder Varus. Try to see if you can hit items onto Varus or Smolder. Smolder is generally the best because you probably won't have enough items left over for Varus, and Smolder does better with just like a single Rage Blade than Varus does with like a single AD item. But ultimately, just play around whatever you can get. You could go for Jace 3 as well because it's another one-cost shapeshifter. So sometimes having multiple things to roll for is actually key to unlocking the true power of a reroll comp. And early game, you want to play around Eldritch and shapeshifters and give Elise items as soon as possible. Another item that people have been experimenting with is Spark, but I think I like Spark a little bit less these days. So if you do end up having Spark, maybe play it on somebody else and give Elise that third item like Declaw. Some good augments for Elise, besides the obvious Spider Queen. Shapeshifter +1s are both really good. Redemption's a fantastic item, and getting to a shapeshifter is actually quite legit. Eternal Growth is just good for scaling and very powerful for any kind of shapeshifter board. Fights are going to last a long time because you just want to drain them slowly over time, so Ascension is good. You have so much HP, so Unified Resistance is a fantastic augment. And Support Golem is just good because you're playing so many high HP targets that can scale with resistances. So if you get like Lockets or Aegis or Randuins, things like that, it can be very, very effective for all these shapeshifter boards. The artifacts that you play on Elise are actually still very similar to Garen from the previous sets. Innervating Locket and Talisman, just really good on slow, draining, like inevitable win condition hero augments. So it's good on Nunu. It's really good on Elise. Death Defiance also surprising does really well also. I think it just defers a lot of the damage and lets Elise stay in the fight very, very long. There's also belief that there might be some other good ones like Seeker's Arm Guard, but I think that these are generally the 3 best in the data, so just go off of that. If you do end up stacking other shapeshifters, Nasus or Nico are really good, but Nasus in general is the best 4-cost tank in the game, so I want to always put items on Nasus. And one thing also to note too is that if you do end up playing Shyvana and Smolder, you do have dragons in, so you don't need things like Sunfire or Red Buff or Morello because you already have the anti-heal burning through their abilities. Wukong is very interesting this set. He's a 3-cost druid, and druid is a non-trait. Like he gets extra stats, but he doesn't actually have any team synergy with any other units. He's basically a threat from set 8 Monsters Attack. If you guys remember things like Urgot and Belveth from back then, that's the same thing as Wukong is. In fact, he's the closest thing to Rammus, I think, that we've seen in quite some time, where you want to stack resistances on him. Except when you play Spin to Win, he actually converts AD again instead of resistances. So you want to actually itemize him a little bit differently. The really tricky thing about Wukong is that you can't really play him unless you hit it in stage 3-2. You can only get this augment at 3-2. You can't get it at 2-1 or 4-2. And so you just have to kind of be in the spot to play it. And the way it usually gets that spot is if you are slamming things generically like a Bloodthirster or Stoneplate or like a Sterix Gauge, have like a Wukong ready, hit Wukong 2 on 3-2 with the augment, and then you can kind of pivot your board. So that's why it's kind of beats here, because even if it's good, it's like so situational, kind of hard to actually angle into it, because a lot of times you're going to be trying to play like Fiora or Warriors or something else entirely, like Olaf, and then you end up just finding yourself into Wukong. If you're playing Wukong in, say, the Jinx variations, where you want to play him as a frontline, you want to stack him like a tank, Stoneplate, Redemption, Warmogs, or maybe another Stoneplate. But when you're playing Spin to Win Wukong, you actually want to give him AD items like Bloodthirster, Sterix Gauge, and that Stoneplate can be very valuable as well to still keep him to the fight. From my experience, I don't think he actually does well as a true solo frontline. So you kind of put him on one side and you have like everyone else tank the other side. So like a soft solo frontline. He's a 3 cost, so you want to get to 7 for the best maximum odds. And because he doesn't actually have like a trait you want to lean to, he's not like a Bastion or a Vanguard, you end up wanting to play team-based synergies. And the 2 best team-based synergies this set to help support a unit are Arcana and Preservers. And so we're basically going to be playing as many Arcana and Preservers. You can flex in as many as you want. Maybe you cut, Hecarim, and instead you play Morgana, and that's where you go for 4 Preservers instead of 4 Arcana. That's totally fine. Because you're rolling for another 3 cost, you're probably going to roll for Bard 3 and try to go for Bard items, which is just an AP nuker. I think a mistake I see a lot of times is that people go for Rageblade on Bard to try to build him like previous sets, but Bard actually just wants straight up like Shojin, Deathcap, Nashers, things like that. Good augments for Wukong. Unleash the Beast gives you the Sterix Gauge, which is really, really nice. Gifts of the Fallen, because you want to just ultimately have Wukong scale, and all these units are just support anyway, so just let them die and scale that Wukong. Triforce, because you want to go for 3 cost power. Martyr, since it's really good for those melee carries. Tiny but Deadly to help Wukong not have to walk around and get to the backline quickly. Giant Mighty might be the best generic combat augment in the game for Prismatic. And you have my sword because you just want to complete 3-item Wukong as soon as possible. One thing I do want to note is that the gap between Wukong 2 and Wukong 3 is huge. I've seen people lose with Wukong 2 in this whole entire board, and they hit Wukong 3 and they win. So definitely try and get Wukong as soon as possible. You might even take some augments like Heroic Grab Bag or take that Champion Duplicator just so you can hit Wukong that much faster. Having been stuck on Wukong 2, I've seen a lot of people take bot 4s with it. But it's fun to see Wukong pop off, and it's kind of a back pocket build. It's pretty good if you can get online, but really hard and really rare. So give it a try if you see a spot for it. Molten Caramel Rumble might be my second favorite hero augment behind Deja Vu Galio. And every game of Rumble that I've played of it, I've gotten a first. And I think it's because I build it differently than other people. The main thing about Molten Caramel is that your strongest Rumble deals 190% damage. So he's doubling his damage and costs less mana, and also gets Omnivamp. So why are we playing things like Bloodthirster onto Rumble and just not build straight up damage to amplify how much damage he's going to rush over and heal it all back anyways? So I personally think that people are building like Archangel's BT, trying to play him like some kind of like Nunu variation and scale with it. But I personally view Rumble kind of like Gnar from previous sets, where you just have him like bum rush and crush through like a weak side of a front line, get to the back line, and completely barbecue everything in the back. The hardest thing about this, I think you need a lot of like specific items. I think you need like a bunch of rods or like cloaks, because I also think that Adaptive Helm is pretty good on him. So you can actually struggle to get like the best items onto Rumble. That's why Magic Wand could be really, really good. But Unify is also good to help give him a little bit extra tankiness, because he can struggle. I also think Vanguards aren't that important on Rumble. Neither is Blaster, and neither is Sugarcraft. Another really weird thing about Rumble that I think people get wrong is that you don't really need to play too much around his traits. I think Vertical Vanguard, Vertical Sugarcraft, and Vertical Blasters, while they can be good, aren't exactly necessary to have success with him. And so you can actually play him in like an Arcana setup similar to Wukong and just really emphasize the amount of power that he gets to push through. Because you're not playing Vanguards nearly as much, you can go for like Unified Resistance and Shields Up, which is still good for Rumble because he ends up having CC immunity, so he's kind of has like Quicksilver on him. I really love Support Golem on him as well to give him some really powerful combos. Chalice ends up being surprisingly really good for Rumble to help him cast even faster and bum rush with a bunch of AP. Featherweights is good to help Rumble get to the back line, plus you're trying kind of reroll Tristan in the back because you just want another 2-cost to roll for. Tristan ends up holding like all the swords, bows, and gloves that you don't want to give Rumble. And then some other things are pretty obvious, like high voltage, just an item for Rumble, and combat advantages just helps him stay into the fight. Rumble's a 2-cost reroll, which we've covered a couple times right now by this video. Roll on 6, stack your Sugarcraft, and get more Vanguard / Arcana units as you level. Position Rumble in the corners. Try to see if you can bum rush the weak sides of the opponent's front lines. Get to the back line. Laugh at your opponents for ever thinking this hero augment is weak. I'm pretty sure it's quite good. The last 2 hero augments we're going to cover, I do think are in C tier and are on the weaker side. Witchy Wallop Poppy is inconsistent because it feels like Poppy falls off way too fast and you're in desperate need of a secondary carry. But the thing is, it's going to be hard to get another carry online unless you go for Zoe 3. But it also creates a little bit of friction of how fast you can push for levels because Zoe also falls off. So you kind of need like both a third carry for Zoe and Poppy. But then how do you get items for a third carry? So it's a little bit awkward. I just think Poppy might be slightly undertuned and might need to get a tiny bit of a buff. But the thing is, Poppy's just a good unit outside the hero augment, so buffing Poppy is probably going to be a little bit too ridiculous. The one thing that I will say is that Poppy with Silvermere Dawn is very, very good. So maybe if you get Silvermere Dawn instead of, say, Titans, you go like BT, Stairs Gauge, Silvermere Dawn. That's where Poppy can truly, really shine. But I haven't seen any other artifact, so it's hard for me to recommend like a full like 3 units the way we did in previous guides. It's a 1-cost reroll, so collect Poppy and Zoe, focus on Econ, try to get some early game snipes. And roll for Poppy 3 and Zoe 3, push levels for 4 Scholar. 4 Scholar is a lot better than 2 Scholar. You do have 2 options with your Arcana Charm. You could actually buff Hecarim to give Poppy the AD plus the durability. But if you go for a bunch of 3 stars, let's say you go for Lilia 3, Poppy 3, Zoe 3, you could actually give it to Ari in the late stages of the game to give your whole team AP and scale things like Rise and Milio in the back. Poppy also kind of becomes really flimsy in the late stages of the game because Poppy no longer shields, so she gains a lot less tankiness and becomes much more vulnerable. Sometimes I actually position Poppy in the second row despite her being 3-item than 3-starred. In general, I do think this is like a little bit less on the cousin side, but hey, I did sneak a couple of top 2s in PvE while trying to play ahead of curve, because if you hit fast enough, you push levels, who knows what might happen. And you could also just play Poppy as the Bastion variation alongside Callista and try to go Poppy Callista with the multi-strikers, right? You play Hecarim, you play Callista, tag in Poppy and Shen, and then all of a sudden you have Bastion multi-strikers. So you could try to tech that way and basically play Poppy as your early game hero augment carry all the way to Callista. Your early game is strong enough, by the way, to potentially win streak with Poppy and just kind of crush everything. So I've seen people like 5 win with Poppy 2 early and Zoe 2 and then just kind of crush through with tempo. That is one advantage of this. You can actually play it from ahead as opposed to like lose streak 1-cost reroll into like a win out. Last but not least, we have Little Lilia. High horsepower Lilia. Man, this hero augment is bad. It's averaging like a 5.2. It's not very consistent, but it's fun. And I do think that people underestimate how good fairies can be. I think Lilia herself is pretty bad, mainly because she falls off very hard in the middle of stage 3. She actually can just start losing, even though you hit 3-star Lilia. Like 2 rounds later, she might just start dropping rounds. And that's because Lilia just basically becomes a single target nuker, and she is still very vulnerable to like a lot of high burst. So yeah, it's very risky to try and play this line. But I did do well because playing around fairies can be very good. If you can get to a good fairy spot with Callista and Katarina, it does cap decently high because of the quality of its top end, right? Callista, Rakan, and Milio are all very good. Katarina 3 can be very, very good. Lilia's best items, we don't really actually know, but a lot of people put like Crown Guard BT on her and then maybe Spark on someone else. You also could just give her 3 items and drop the Fairy Crown, right? This is a 3rd item you often play on Lilia, but you want to drop it later on. And then you can actually give this Eternal Devotion to like Rakan. And honestly, just like stop playing Lilia items like game. It's a little bit inconsistent, which is kind of what makes it really hard. And I'd rather actually like, you know, crown Katarina or Callista instead of Lilia. Other augments worth considering. I do think 9 Fairy can be very good, but you do need +2. If you can get to 9 fairy, that's a way for you to win the game. Martyr is good because it scales off of HP and fairies have a ton of HP. Royal Guard ends up being quite good, but you do need to position a little bit differently to make sure that fairies can survive. Unified is good because you end up having so much HP, good resistances that capitalize on it. You need a lot of rods in this comp, so Magic Wand is good. And I really like Item Collector to help give fairies a ton of damage. And because you're playing things like Fairy Crowns, you get extra items, so your Item Collector is better than usual. Early game, you actually do end up winning, kind of similar to Poppy, because you get a 1-cost 2-star. You end up tempoing a lot, and you end up actually just like winning a lot of stage 2 and trying to bleed out in the late game to like a top 4. But the reality is this composition is quite weak, so just wait for a buff. But if you do end up high rolling hard enough and getting to the spot, maybe you can top 3 or better. So those are the ways that we've learned to play all the hero augments for set 12, Magic, and Mayhem. I don't think they're all optimized, especially towards the bottom. We don't really know what are some of the best variations of these weaker, more situational ones, but they do have potential. And if they do have any updates, we'll reflect it on the website. I think reroll is really fun this set. In fact, I was saying on my stream that I think reroll in set 12 might be more fun than 4 costs for me. So I might be playing a lot of hero augments. So if I meet you on ladder, please don't grief my units here because I might be clicking these hero augments a little more than I should be since I'm enjoying them a lot. I also have a ton of videos of me playing these hero augments on my other channels, so check out some of that content if you ever want to see that gameplay in full motion. Thanks for watching this video. Good luck on the climb, and let me know what you guys think in the comments below.